Hello. So here I am today having a live stream conversation with Martin Sellner from Austria. And I think there was, I think we've kind of been in the general right wing sphere for many of the same years. And I do remember talking a few times to the woman who, is your wife now, Brittany Sellner. Although I think I knew her, talked to her before she got married to you. And we were talking a bit, and we decided to have a conversation about just the right-wing movements in general between Europe and America, and I guess comparing, contrasting, and seeing what the prospects are for the future. So, Martin, probably most people know who you are, but do you just want to introduce yourself, say hello?
Hello to everyone. Thank you very much for having me here on your show. I've been watching and following your content for several years right now. It was also my wife who brought your work to my attention. She's a big fan of your work.
Well, thank you.
No, she really is. And she was also looking forward to the stream. I, for myself, I'm a political activist, co-founded GI in Austria. And I've been active in the movement for a long time, but I'm also author and journalist on theoretical right-wing issues in Austria at the moment. And I'm also a streamer and an ex-YouTuber since they banned me.
Yeah, well, maybe we're all headed in that direction. Although the ban hammer's become a lot more scarce now after 2022, but we'll see how that goes. I think sort of an interesting place to start with this all is that it appears in the North American context like right-wing populism is pretty much dead. And this is sort of dovetailed with a lot of theory, right-wing theory or right-wing ideas coming out of the North American sphere that have been largely focused on elite theory, on the work that people like Curtis Yarvin have done, that really the modes that we typically take towards popular politics are just not going to work in the modern order, and that something radically different is needed. Whereas it seems in Europe that there's still populist energy, although it's hard to see exactly where it's going. And, from an outsider looking in, it appears that Western Europe has just been dominated by the politics of the US State Department since 1946. And I don't know, I guess I'd be interested to hear what your perspectives are, speaking as a European and not an outsider looking in.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, especially like if I'm looking at your channel and the whole, I would say, NRX sphere in America. That's also something that really interests me. And I would say a development that has not yet really reached the European right-wing intellectual discourse. And when I saw your channel for the first time, it was hard for me to put you in the right place. I didn't really know where you're coming from, because obviously I was aware of the alt-right, of radix and everything that got big during the Trump populist movement, and all these authors like Paul Gottfried, who coined the term. But then there was something, I would say, very new and interesting developing with the elite theory, the blocks of Moldbach. And I think it's also something that we can learn a lot from in the European New Right. But you're right, here we still, I would say, believe in activism, or a lot of people. I also still believe in it, so that we can change something, change the political discourse with visible action. And also the idea of right-wing populism is not really dead yet. So we still have some hope in changes in France, in Italy, maybe Austria and Germany. So I think there's still in the right wing some people, and I'm counting myself to those people who believe that with political activism and also with party politics, we can change the cultural tide.
Yeah, and I guess this is a good place to start. Obviously, what people call NRX is a variety of different schools that there's a lot of shared lineage with different Catholic thinkers and different very anti-Christian thinkers, and it cross-pollinates with sort of what you consider paleoconservatism, which is the ancestor of modern right-wing populism, but also sort of the ancestor of modern right-wing anti-populism. You see in people like Academic Agent and Aaron McIntyre, Sam Francis and Paul Gottfried, who you mentioned, are big influences there. I guess from an American context, it doesn't, and I say this as sort of a very anti-populist person, I just don't see an avenue that really where radical change can happen, where a populist force forces the elite against their will to do something. The elite realizes it's in a precarious position where it stands right now, but they don't know they don't know what to do about it. But they're certainly not just about to let a huge inflow of populists come in and take over everything, because they think that that's going to lead to their ultimate demise politically. Maybe more threatening to them in more foundational levels, but that's sort of how they view it. And with that perspective reigning in all of the institutions, it's very hard to move forward in any way. Not to mention that the demographic issue in America is just the sort of popular base for support for classic American populism is just not there anymore, really.
I think it's a very important issue and a big black pill, I will say for a lot of alt-right people in Europe who still believe in a revival of fascism, a demographic issue. Like if you look at, for example, the movement in Italy, where D'Annunzio conquered the city of Fiume and then created this reign of a few weeks. I don't know if you heard about this, and I once wrote a piece with the title "Fiume Will Never Come Again," because this density of young men who came home from a war, and then joined the ranks of the communist street movement or the fascist street movement, that's gone, that's not there. But I don't know if, like for a mass movement on the streets, the boomers could be our revolutionary subject.
Maybe the boomers are in their 70s now. That's going to be.
Well, maybe the younger boomers, but all the right-wing Pegida movements in Germany, most people there are older people. I agree with you, but I still think that protests on the street, demonstrations, when they are within a bigger and I would say the right political strategy, can change something and also can force the elites to change. But obviously not if it's just a lukewarm populism and like a magical belief in the fetish for demonstration that ends without any guidance in the storming of the capital from Brasilia to Berlin to Washington, D.C. But I think if you have the right strategy and if you apply the right mechanics, I think you can change something. And I think our democracies are not beyond reform. They're not unhackable.
Yeah, I mean, a surge of popular energy would be useful to accomplish something, but it's very hard for me to imagine what that would look like. Maybe it'd be easier in the European context, but what would that look like in the American context? It's hard for me to imagine that, because the youth energy just isn't there, and maybe there is sort of a youth energy in the hinterlands, but it's not easy to control in any kind of realistic way. The protests that occurred in North America, obviously the two big ones in the last few years were the infamous January 6th protests, which were hugely self-destructive to the Trump movement. And then there was the trucker protest, which I've heard people say that it accomplished some things, but I don't know. It didn't. It basically, I guess it served to sort of discredit the government a little bit, but it's hard to see how Trudeau's government really has to respond to that in any meaningful way.
No, I agree with you. These movements I would say they showed kind of a revolutionary potential, especially also the farmers movement in the Netherlands. So if you have a lot of people who have heavy machinery and then can create some kind of peaceful resistance that really shuts down the political system, at least they can create some kind of peaceful disruption. But if you look at America, in my opinion, the whole Trump movement, the populist movement, had a tremendous effect on the Republican Party. And for a while, I think that really changed. But for a while, also the America First strategy of Fuentes and his Groypers becoming a radical flank and some kind of the guilty pleasure and forbidden fruit to the youth of the Republican Party, crashing the events, holding counter events on the same dates and the same venue, close to the same venues, I think was kind of successful. Because if you look also how I would say the tone changed a little bit in the Republican Party, how Charlie Kirk adopted that, and how Trumpism and I would say a more European style, socially patriotic idea suddenly changed the Republican Party, the GOP. I think this was definitely a metapolitical step in the right direction.
Mm. Well, what do you say to the Yarvin? And I tend to agree with this perspective that Nick Fuentes, and I do believe that he did his one legacy. I think Fuentes is going to be pushing the Republican Party like to the right. The whole Charlie Kirk grapering thing, that was like his big operation, which was to get them to stop sliding left in the left's frame. But his stunts after that have largely been just to kind of they've been discrediting, they've consolidated our enemies and divided the right in a lot of ways, and it's hard to see what's really come from it, I guess. And I'm highly skeptical of this, because in order for there to be some kind of change, the mainstay of the young elites in this country have to really feel something is wrong and really feel that something needs to change. And Nick Fuentes, I think for every one guy he recruits, there's sort of two very, very high agency individuals that are young that he kind of brings against the right. And I feel like that feels like the wrong direction to me.
I mean, I don't want to go too much into this, and also like the whole Kanye thing.
Sure.
I just wanted to point out that this strategy, in my opinion, would work in America, because you have this one big right-wing party. You don't have the small populist right-wing parties. And if you can, in a way, take this whole big, I think it's an elephant, the GOP animal, by its trunk, and slowly lead into a right-wing direction, the whole political spectrum moves along. But I completely agree with you in the terms that you have to be, in a way, provocational here and radical, but also approachable, serious, to not lose those people and lose the masses. But I think that would be a way how you could at least, I think, affect the political discourse in America, and bring the GOP a bit away from this what people would call alt-right neocon thinking that I think we both disagree with. So I think theoretically it might work.
The neocons, I mean, to me though, I mean, as sort of someone who follows elite theory, the big problem is, like, if you have this populist movement, as you had with Trump, the educated class is totally against you. And so when you get into office, every single one of them is going to turn against you because they think they're fighting for their lives. And this was hugely detrimental to Trump's effectiveness. And it seems hugely detrimental to the effectiveness of other European populists, and certainly to the Brazilian populist movement as well.
I agree. I think that's the biggest problem we have, that we don't have a counter elite. And I don't know if you're familiar with Louis Althusser's theory about the state. There's the political state apparatus. There's a state apparatus in the normal state, and then there are ideological state apparatuses. And if you cannot take those and you don't conquer those, then you're basically paralyzed with having this political machinery, but you can't use it because the church, the school, and so on, they become kind of an ideological deep state to sabotage you in any way. And I think that's something that Jarvin really, I would say, translated very well with this metaphor of the cathedral, although I don't really like the term because I associate cathedral with something positive and not negative.
People give Yarvin crap for that all the time, but that was the word he used and it just stuck.
Exactly, but I mean, it's a nice term for us in the European New Right. We call it after Gramsci, the cultural hegemony, the ruling ideology, or the ideological state apparatus. But I think the big failure of right-wing populism is has no theory, no counterculture. It doesn't really act metapolitically. And so there are just big waves of protest and one wave after another, but the whole Overton window moves more and more to the left. And I think the question is, can we slow this down? Can we pull the brake, or can we maybe even change the discourse and change the debate? And I think there still is a lot of vivid, interesting energy, especially in dissident right, in dark academia. If you look at the millions of views that a guy like Jordan Peterson got, if you look at things that are happening also in, I would say, left-wing academia, with a lot of dissidents that are leaving these areas, and then you have this crazy quixotic like multitude of people, like Bronze Age pervert, and like for every taste you have something. I think it's way more fascinating, interesting, and alive than what you see on the left. So I think there's still some metapolitical intellectual energy on the right.
Well, that's actually the interesting thing, because the left appears to be just dying. There's no interesting people there anymore, really. There's no interesting writers. There's no interesting. I mean, their big intellectual celebrity in America is Ibrahim X. Kendi, who's he's this like it's this sort of 6-year-old logic when taken to politics of good guys versus bad guys. And totalitarian style thinking that's not even aware that it's totalitarian, and that's sort of the mainstay of where the left is intellectually. And then these professors who are kind of rehashing endless reiterations of critical race theory and a variety of other ID pool stuff going on in the academy. All the interesting stuff being done culturally and intellectually is on the right wing, I would postulate. And that's sort of my feeling, is that this isn't going to really change until there's sort of the emergence of a new intellectual class and sort of a new underserved hypothetical elite class that's on the outs. And what will emerge will be sort of an alliance between elite red staters that have resource wealth, and then a new intellectual dissident class in the blue states. And then in that sort of alliance, there'll be the imaginings of a new American regime. And once the American regime changes, all bets are off in Europe, because I don't know. This might be condescending, but to me, it very much feels like the politics of the EU are controlled by the State Department.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah, it feels like it's a puppet regime, basically, and but that's my impression, right? Because is it in Germany's interests to keep pouring gasoline on this Ukraine crisis? I don't think so, right?
Not at all. I mean, Germany is really acting completely against its own interests, and I think that's also what makes it so complicated for other countries, from Russia to China, to deal at the moment with Europe and Germany, because Europe is not acting like a normal actor in game theory in its own interest, because you never know if they will now build a pipeline at Nord Stream or then blow it up suddenly, or let it be blown up. So I think that's very erratic, and it's definitely the bridgehead of the American thalassocracy. But I think there's a big chance at the moment in the changing global order for metapolitical breakthrough. And I think you sketch it very nicely with an alliance, which is an economic alliance and also an intellectual alliance of a new historic bloc that could form, because America, I think, moves a bit away from this idea of unilateral world domination, making the world safe for democracy. We're going into a deglobalized, neo-imperial, de facto multipolar world. And America would need a new ruling ideology and a new moral legitimacy for this new world. And which could this be? And I think it's very interesting. If you looked at Biden, in a way, prolonged a lot of the economic politics, like the isolationist economy politics of reindustrialization and so on, from Trump. So it's very interesting. Also, he's very hard on China, just like Trump did. So I see there's a trend going on. I think it's not very compatible with this ideology of left-wing universalism and liberalism that's ruling the academia now in America.
Yeah, man, the academia, it's sad to witness it, and it's just kind of transparently broken and depressing. And it's kind of sad to see something that was once so productive and proud brought to this stage. But I think we're only going in one direction, because American universities are quickly descending into political favorisms along identity politics lines. And people are getting rid of testing as a way of determining who gets into colleges. So you can only imagine what's going to be the new intellectual class after that. But I guess we'll see what happens. I was going to ask a question about I guess one thing I always struck me a little bit here, and maybe this is another fruitful angle, is that one thing I was very keenly aware of when I was growing up in California was that the progressives around me always had very tight links to Europe, and they had friends in Europe, they had colleagues in Europe. This was largely because of an international student system that was, organized initially by, guess what, the State Department, right? But it was always felt like the American left and the European left were one and the same. Whereas the American right and the European right were totally different. There was nothing related about them. Back then, the American right was neocon, and the European right, didn't really exist, or was sort of this quasi-nationalist entity. And I think that might actually reverse in the future. Do you get the sense that there might be sort of a unified right-wing community between Europe and America?
I think it might happen, and I think what's developing in America, and I think it really started with Trump, where also the American politics became, in a way, a talking point in the European right wing, thanks to Trump. I think it might happen, and I think it can happen if we find common ideological ground. And I think this could be like the European right, as I understand it, is a intellectual post-war right-wing movement, which obviously has a strategic, ideological, and I would say also iconic, optics difference to the old right, which is fascism, National Socialism, but it's based on the ground of the conservative revolution. So the ideas of the conservative revolution, which are in a way criticizing modernity and enlightenment in a broader sense. And I think that's also what unites most of the American old right, dissident right, NRX scenes that are in a way critical of modernity, of progress and enlightenment, while the neocons, I would say, also in the Hegelian thought, just want to, in a way, organize progress and organize this humanitarian future in a bit different style than the communists, And I think that would be a common ground. And since the American right, which is a very new phenomenon at this point, also becomes critical of modernity, but also the technosphere, and then the masses, and adapts elite theory, and I think also dwells into the conservative revolution thinking, then I think we found a common ideological ground for a European right-wing discourse. I would say, a global right-wing discourse.
One of the big stumbling blocks has always been this issue of nationalism, because in a lot of ways, nationalism makes sense for some countries. And there's two problems. The first of all is that generally in North America, what you're going to experience in most contexts is you're not going to see geographic divisions that could all give rise to some kind of regional nationalism or ethnic nationalism, because the populations are too intermixed and there's too many of them. And there just has to be a way of governing multi-ethnic populations. Whereas in Europe, there still is more of a semblance of at least in Eastern Europe, and maybe less so in Western Europe these days, there still is a semblance of the idea that this is a nation for Poles, or this is a nation for Hungarians, and so on and so forth. And so first of all, there's sort of an organizational difference there. How do you develop a right-wing theory that has to allow for nationalism in some areas but not others? And then the other problem is, and this is something that I think Ukraine kind of highlights this, but there's this really weird thing in Europe of this petty nationalism, where people, the left will strategically make alliances with the national interests of certain groups of people and use historic grievances cynically to push forward leftist goals. A classic example would be the Scottish Nationalist Party, which, from my reading, is just completely full of progressives that don't care about ethnic heritage at all. But they'll try to feed some kind of resentment against the British, or the Ukraine war, where it seemed for basically all of 2022, most progressives were just the biggest ethno-nationalists for Ukraine, as long as it was the blue and yellow people. I'm kind of curious, how do you think we get around this issue of nationalism and petty nationalism?
Yeah, I think that are very important issues. Like there are actually two questions. I would address the last one first, which is petty nationalism in Europe. It's a big issue and problem, and the Ukraine war forces us to think about it. Especially, for example, if you look now, Poland versus Germany, there's a huge increase in old school revanchism and nationalism between Poland and Germany, and Poland does what it did before. Obviously, it allies with foreign non-spatial powers. Before it was England, now it's America. And if Europe doesn't come to an agreement, a European order, and after Carl Schmitt, an ban on intervention of non-spatial powers, the foreign powers will always create a balance of power and ally with those who are weaker. And then it will be an endless war, just like in the Balkans, where the Ottoman Empire, the Austrian Empire, the Russian Empire just used these people as pawns on a chessboard. And that's what will happen to Europe if we don't overcome petty nationalism. But I was just reading the essay of Julius Evola, The Two Faces of Nationalism. Obviously, it also has a very good source of energy. And what we in Generation Identity always tried is to take this good energy of nationalism and patriotism, but not like turn it into petty, revanchist, chauvinistic nationalism that results in brother wars again in the end. I think the only way is to find a common European idea and also European strategic autonomy and geopolitics. And that's, I think at the moment it's a bit hard and complicated. We are seeing a revival of this petty nationalism, but I think this war will force us again and push us again in this direction. And at some point, I think it will have to be an alliance of France and Germany, creating kind of sphere, an idea of a greater space and empire where all nations can have their identity and can have their autonomy and can have the states, but they're not allowed to have an alliance with a power like the United States of America or China or whatever non-spatial power. I think that's the only way to achieve this and to overcome this petty nationalism and to counter this problem, as you said, that the progressive globalist people always use nationalist ideologies, like from Lawrence of Arabia to Taiwan to Ukraine now. It's a very clear strategy of the globalists.
So that's very interesting. What you seem to be suggesting is a sort of shadow EU. Create a duplicate-based version of the EU that operated to politically unify people across national boundaries, and then use it as a counterbalance of the interests of the actual EU and the US State Department.
Exactly. Like a lot of people believed it would be possible. Some German politicians and right-wingers I know even hoped that at some point the European Union would become more right-wing than the German government. And they see more chances here because right-wing countries entering. And if now really obvious at the moment, it's a heat of nationalism, but in I don't know, 5-10 years when I think the war is frozen down in a way, and then you have this newly nationalistic right-wing Baltic states, the intermarium states in the European Union. I think at some point this might happen. But I definitely think we need a European order that's above the nations and nationalism, but that doesn't destroy the nations like the current European Union doesn't try to become an anti-imperialistic empire, like Barroso, one of the founders of the European Union ideology, once said. So I think, most new right people in Europe think that way, because we've seen that these brother wars and petty nationalism don't lead anywhere. But what interests me is what you said about America. Obviously, nationalism doesn't work in America that way because you don't have national identities. But I still think there could be kind of a right-wing traditional way of governing America. Don't you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. It's hard to see exactly how it works because America has always been governed via the cities. And the cities are they're kind of falling apart right now, but there's no sort of counter-urban elite to replace the current corrupt set of urban rulers that we have in these areas. So the opposition we have to the current sort of Democratic Party, the Curtis Yarvin calls the cathedral, we have like the white middle class, or the white and sometimes Asian, sometimes Hispanic middle class, and it's sort of geographically distributed into these ex-urban areas, and then that's pretty much it. That's the basis of a right-wing populist movement, but it has a very, very, very difficult time taking any institutions that it really needs and using them effectively. This is something that we've been at this for years, and this is this sort of stunt Rufo pulled off with the new university in Florida. This is the first time that people have really tried to use state power to just take a university ideologically away from the system that bequeathed it, or that created it. And it's very difficult to see how this comes about, right? I guess this is the problem we're dealing with in America. I think the Republicans' ability to win elections is very, very limited. And when they win elections, their ability to use those elections and translate them into permanent appointments is even more limited. The appointed government in America is almost entirely affiliated to the Democratic Party and loyal to the Democratic Party above that of the elected officials themselves. And so if there ever was a change of government, all of that would have to be replaced. And no one really knows how to do that yet. I know Aaron McIntyre has speculated that maybe state governments like DeSantis will just start becoming increasingly independent, and that it will go back to a sort of near regionalism. But again, that's very hard to see how that comes about.
I have to say, I'm also a bit black pill on this. Like, my hope for America always was kind of a regionalism, yes. And I hope that at some point, if with the ethnic vote and the import of voters, and then the export of blue voters to the red states, the Republicans would come to the understanding that this democracy is flawed, and then especially if the Democrats then maybe even do away with the electoral college, create new states, then this could turn into this idea of we are being taxed, but we have no representation anymore. And then you have an idea of autonomy that fits the Americana myth. Because with an ethno-state idea, it will never work in America, because it has no foundation in the American populist Trumpist movement. But if you have a narrative that fits into this Americana Declaration of Independence idea, and says, okay, well, what we have now is a democracy, not a republic anymore. We have taxation, but no representation. The Democrats have destroyed the federal system, then there might be the energy for a country that is deeply red to de facto, maybe with trucker protests and blocking of roads, create kind of an autonomy when it comes to migration and so on. So that was also kind of a hope scenario for me in America. But I'm not so sure of it anymore, because the problem is, I think the political pressure will not be there, because I see America economically thriving in the coming decades.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah,
I'm skeptical.
Compared
maybe more than Europe.
I would say compared to the rest of the world, relatively,
Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah. Well, there's sort of two forces. There's a possible counter elite coming from a lot of dispossessed people who are just not going to university, or who go to university and recognize it for sort of the den of mendacity that it's become recently. And they're looking for something different, and that are elites, so to speak. And then there are sort of the disaffected former middle class, which will try to seize some amount of autonomy from the federal government in any practical way that they can. And those are the two forces that need to be kind of independently fostered and then brought together in some kind of alliance. The one big advantage is that the number of true believers in the Democratic Party are absolutely small. I mean, with the exception of sort of like these overproduced female elite, mainly female elites that kind of run the bureaucracies, most of the Democratic voters are just kind of voters of convenience. They're getting something from the government. They see the government as being the defender of their particular identity group. And because of that, or they're just really involved in CNN's narrative, and because of that, they vote blue no matter who. Once that governing apparatus shakes narratively a little bit, those groups start becoming softer. And I think there's hope there potentially for a new alliance.
I agree. And also what we should not discount is the weakening of the ruling ideology. Contrary to maybe academic age, and I think that the ideology is not something that is created by the elites in their favor, but the ruling ideology is combining the elites with the ruled, creating an hegemony. And if this ideology becomes weak and dies, then also the ruling class loses power and authority. And I think since they have a revolutionary ideology of progress, and they've basically broken any taboo and destroyed any tradition, you see how they're losing this vigor. When in the 90s and 80s you still had this idea of rebels and skaters and suburban subcultures who were against Bush and against the war and this whole Simpsons era, when most of those people still the left-wing Democrat at the moment. This revolution is eating itself and it doesn't find anything to protest against, and it becomes completely weak and especially very, very cringe. So it's not funny anymore. And the fun, the satire, the memes, the aesthetics, they're on our side. And so this ruling ideology is very weak and very old, slow, and is using censorship, more and more censorship every day. And there's a dialectics between censorship and authenticity and authority. Like if you are losing authority as a ruling ideology, then you have to use censorship. So I would also say the more we force them to use censorship, it's also a bit of a metapolitical win.
Yeah, for sure. But the thing is that the most important component about all of this, and I'm a kind of a firm believer that the side that believes in itself the most is the side that's going to win. And the thing is that so whenever I look at the two sides, in terms of elites, obviously, whoever has the elite that believes in itself the most will win. And for a very, very long time, the blue elite, the progressive elite, believes in itself absolutely. I think that's starting to shake a little bit. But for the right, we need to have a future that people believe in. We need to have a faith and spirituality that people believe in, and a path for humanity that people believe in, because that's what's going to carry us through, not memes. You're absolutely right that sort of meme magic is always on the side of the oppressed, and the left could use it in the 90s and they can't use it anymore. But meme magic won't help you secure a ruling base, because then you'll have power and your ability to be satirical or ironic will decrease with that power. Only true belief allows you to wield power, in my opinion. And that is the thing that the right wing is grasping for. And I think finding in some places, but still it's very early days. And that's something that the left wing is losing.
I agree with you. It cannot only be satire and meme, and I think that's a big problem we have, especially like I'm now over 30 as well, and I see it with the young generation growing up, the young right-wing generation growing up in this 100 layers of irony and cynicism, in this strange digital echo chambers, which always where only the most cynical, most crazy people get attention and their dopamine kick. So I think that's a very bad development. But I also would say that the right-wing people now, and obviously you also see it in memes with this thread life memes, there are those who have kind of a utopia, that a lot of people, young people yearn for, especially who have been alienated in the cities, while the left-wing utopia, communism, like world peace and world prosperity, it's gone, and the only thing they have to offer now is this Greta Thunberg vision of leveling everything down on a global poverty level, being eating insect burgers, being ruled by Klaus Schwab. So their utopia is very negative, defensive, and technocratic, and it's not very nice. It doesn't sound nice.
Yeah, get in the climate pod does not have the same ring to it as Workers of the World Unite.
Exactly.
And Greta Thunberg, I can't believe she's become so popular, but Yeah, when I saw her originally, I'm like, this can't possibly fly in America. But I guess people in America bought it. and I don't really know how. But yeah, I mean, the leftist vision is completely uninspiring. But I guess, and this is where, what do you see as the next steps then for the right wing to kind of build this basis of belief and energy?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think that's the biggest problem. Yeah, I think you cannot build and create a faith and meaning. That's something you only can find and experience. And I think that's also a big problem of modernist right-wing ideologies, especially like in the third political theory, the 20th century. They wanted to create out of nothing political theories and political religions. So I think that's something where you have to have an openness. But in the realms of politics, I think what the right can do is still work on this Gramscian concept of a cultural revolution, to try to destroy the enemy's ideas and narratives of our opponents by ridiculizing them, creating good and inspiring, uplifting counter narratives, prefigurative politics, where we try also to create in little communes, little areas, the way we want the future to be, to create living examples of what we stand for. And I would say try to change the political discourse, create a better environment and climate, and destroy right-wing populism, this lukewarm, superficial ideology that leads us nowhere, and turn those parties into real agents of change. So that's just a very short summary. And I think the global trend of deglobalization, which will bring a lot of crises and degrowth and unfortunately poverty, is something that will really become kind of a, an accelerator for this process if we play our cards right, in my opinion.
I don't exactly know how class dynamics works in the EU so much. I'm a little bit in Britain, but definitely not on the continent. How do you see the present Austrian or German elite classes? Do you see them as being true believers? Are they wavering? Are they young looking for something new to be a part of, something different to believe in? What are they like, I guess?
Yeah, that's I would say there's a hardcore of true believers, but they believe in this ideology of guilt. So they are really completely guilt driven, just like in America. It's that's really what drives them, and that's the only thing that that gives them like a feeling of the sacred, where something is important and a sense of meaning. But I think that those are a very small fraction of society, and I think that that most of the population and also people, I would say, in the mid tier of the society would change very quickly if there was a different tune of the ruling ideology. So I think that their power looks very big, like the Wizard of Oz, but if you actually look at them, it's a very small fraction, and they're very used to take orders from the United States of America, don't have any sense of geopolitics. So I also think that the Ukraine war, in a way, will change this elite forever. Because I think they don't really know what they should do here. We have a lot of dissident left-wing people now who are against the war because they really believe in the ideology of being anti-war, while others in the Green Party especially become the biggest warmongers, although they are part of this peace-loving Green Party. So there's after COVID another rupture going through this elite.
I always thought that the whole guilt thing might be a proper springboard, because there's something that's supremely disgusting about people who are simultaneously guilty and also social climbers. I mean, obviously, if someone's genuinely pietistic about their guilt and monastic in their attitude, there's a certain poetry to that. But I always felt that when I saw these, and I don't know, in my experience, it's always predominantly white women in their like 40s or late 30s, early 40s, that are just on and on and on about this white guilt stuff. To me, this is incredibly off-putting. And I always thought that there could be a politics that kind of, held itself in contrast to this guilt, held itself in contrast to this kind of squalid debasement before history that isn't even really properly understood, in my opinion.
And how would this politics look like, in your opinion? Like, how would you?
Well, that's a good question, right? Because the thing is that I'm stealing this from Yarvin again, like I usually do. Elites can't just stand up and say, I'm pro myself. There's something very anti-aristocratic about that. There has to be a heroic component to it. I thought maybe it would be like, we are going to sacrifice. We are the party that's for sacrificing for the future of our people, right? And so this isn't about me or about my privilege. This is about our descendants, the future humans, their health, their ability to connect with their ancestors, their ability to see something that's heroic in the past. And that, to me, I don't know. I mean, I guess no one's really bought into this en masse yet, but to me, that message would seem much more fruitful. It would make more sense to me than to be all these people who are lining up to buy Robin DiAngelo's $2,000 tickets to get lectured about their white fragility. Why is it more noble to, be basically someone who consumes electronics and then flagellates themselves over their white privilege than to be somebody who's actually creating a homestead, or building an intentional community, or reconnecting with a classic school of learning that was beautiful and that's life-giving. I don't know. To me, the fact that the latter is more beautiful would make it more compelling to an elite audience, but maybe not.
No, I agree with you. It's way more compelling, but I think there's a reason why guilt is so popular. First of all, you can use it obviously as an elite technique, like Paul Gottfried wrote about this, how multiculturalism and the politics of guilt work together. But this vision that you sketch here is attacked, and it's basically shut out of university. And if you are studying philosophy, history, whatsoever, the only possible version of identity that you're allowed to have is a guild identity. Apart from the guild identity, there's only economics and like abstract ideas. There's nothing that really gives you a sense of meaning, an historic sense of meaning. And this guild ideology in Germany is hyper völkisch, very ethnic nationalistic, because these people are all ethnic Germans in Antifa, because only when you're an ethnic German and you have a biological lineage to the evil German people and ancestors, then you can have this version of German identity politics. So in a way, it's very nationalistic, and I think a lot of people just searching for a meaning in life. They're searching for any kind of national identity, because people need a national identity for a fulfilled developed identity. You need your sexual identity, your professional, but also a national identity. And the only allowed national identity is guilt. And a lot of people, especially those people who I would say would have become monks in the medieval times, who have this mindset, they now become basically monks and priests of this religion, and only take the only path of identity that's offered to them. I think that's why it's so compelling, because the alternative to this guild identity is basically being anywhere and having no sense in life at all if you follow the official paths.
Yeah, it's hard to see, because I don't think that these people who are really into white guilt are. I think most monks historically have been highly spiritual people, and I don't think that these white guilt people are highly spiritual at all. As a matter of fact, I think they're kind of spiritually impoverished. Obviously so. When you look at someone like Robin DiAngelo, I don't see somebody who's a spiritual master. I see somebody who's just this grasping woman who's kind of caught on to an amazing grift and is selling white guilt back to the people who only can embrace white guilt as an identity.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't think she's a spiritual person. What I meant is, like, there's a void of spirituality, and for a lot of people, this this idea of having guilt and having this historic mission of making it up to the world, is filling this void of a religion. That's basically my point.
I agree with you. I'm just trying to kind of sense out where the weak points are from this ideology, because I'll be honest with you. I think that I'll admit sort of a little bit of a black pill here is that this progressive worldview has lasted a lot longer than I thought it would. These people are willing to do anything to keep this gravy train going, and it's hard to see exactly where it ends. It's obviously there are a lot of people who are defecting from it, but I don't see. It's hard to see how the defectors kind of turn the tables on the house, so to speak.
Do you think that this ideology, and especially these self-destructing ideologies of a white shift, of replacement migration, which obviously is against the interest of majorities in Western countries that are turning into minorities, do you think it could have also been uphold this policy without consumerism and this big zone of indifference and the flood of entertainment, the weapons of mass distraction? Or do you think without this constant seduction, and sedatives, it would not have been possible?
Yeah, I think that there's no way that we could embrace this ideology unless we were really comfortable. I don't believe that this ideology works unless people are very comfortable. But I don't know if there's going to be anything that really makes us super uncomfortable, or at least the elite super uncomfortable, right? And that's my worry, is that I think that a lot of middle class people are going to be super uncomfortable. Now, the question is, can they make themselves into a new elite based on that? But I think that these people who are sort of the foot soldiers of the cathedral ideology are going to kind of stay in their hug box pods and keep on dipping into the wine cooler and downloading Netflix until, I don't know, the entire system comes screeching to a halt. That's my only sense. Or I'm trying to think of the progressives who've done genuine conversions, who've done absolute 180s. I think Angela Nagel is sort of the closest that I can think of, even though I think she considers herself still a progressive. But most of them, like Barry Weiss or whatever, they've kind of embraced this weird neoconism, and there's absolutely no movement around them, unlike in the 80s. But this is sort of where they are, is trying to do kind of leftism, but at a previous iteration. And I don't know. I think the only thing we have to be really careful of on the right is to not let those people into power. And it's fine if they want to give us money, but we have to be very conscious of driving in a different direction and not just allowing the forces of being the past iteration of the left to take control of the narrative.
True. Unfortunately, to prevent them from grabbing power, we have to be in a position of power in the first place, which we aren't. But I strongly believe that without this flood of wealth, this whole ideology would not have worked. It's a decadence ideology in a post-political world. And I think at least for Europe, this will change, because the social systems of Europe, especially in this deglobalized world, the remilitarized Europe, will not be able to be upholden, and the population replacement is now moving in a very nasty phase. For example, there are like 2 gang rapes in Germany every single day, according to the statistics that came out yesterday. And there is one formative event after another, and the whole thing is bound for failure, because at some point these ethnic minorities, which are very different than in America, which are like radically different to our system and our civilization, will become so big that they will not be able to keep this machinery up. And at this point, there will be some kind of system infarct. So I think for Europe, I don't really see a way how this could peacefully turn into a world state, and how these elites, these managerial elites, can just keep everything calm. So I really think in Europe that there'll be a big crisis coming. I don't believe in a big a big change and a big day where everything changes, but I think there will be a lot of developments which will favor right-wing parties and right-wing movements, and will at least give us the possibility for solution. For America, I think it's a bit different. And North America and Canada, I think the countries just too damn big, and you always have the solution of just going out and going off the grid and buying cheap land, and there's no density here like in Europe. And then I think America has no resource shortage when it comes to food, for example. A starvation in America, at least from my understanding, is something that's completely impossible. So I think the pressure of suffering might not be as hard. Plus, you always can just have your libertarian, homesteading idea at some place on the countryside. That's the biggest problem I'd see for American political change.
I think the restructuring in America will be more radical. I think in Europe, the lines will more or less stay where they are. And I think in some sense, the alliance in America might stay where they are too, but just the way we organize our government and our relationship to it just has to change. And, that's all there is to it. And, this is the next step I see for both of us is just how do we mentor new young men? Because the crisis I find myself in right now is I'm not that old, but I kind of feel like among the people that I know who are doing this stuff, I'm one of the older people who kind of gets it. People who are of a generation that's older than mine seem to be kind of still connected to these weird ideas that they picked up through neoconservatism or through moderate democratic politics. And I feel like really what's so strange is it's sort of falling on us to instruct new young men and how to be effective young men.
Yeah, I agree. I still work with a lot of young men. We have workshops and teaching events, and I think that's one of the most important things, that we create a counter education and systems of education and formation outside of universities. I think here it's a perfect example where I can use social media and networks like YouTube for good. But what would interest me is, how did you become right wing? When you said it's your background was not so much in the traditional right wing conservative circles, were you always right wing conservative in your opinion?
Well, I had sort of a libertarian phase in high school, but then I became progressive after my senior year. And through most college, I was like this new atheist, kind of Obama style progressive. And I guess it sort of started off with just noticing big hypocrisies in sort of the Berkeley East Bay people when it came to what their purported views were, and then just the reality of what was around us, especially when it came to things like the racial division. Obviously, a great example would be just Berkeley and Oakland, which are these incredibly progressive areas, but they have and everyone just endlessly talks about race, but they're one of the worst racially divided areas of this country in terms of achievement. And no one would ever engage with any of these things. There would just be this, even then, even in the 2000s, before the Great Awakening happened, you could see the prefiguration of it in Berkeley. Nobody wanted to have conversations. It was all pure emotion. It was all just groupthink. And this sort of had me casting about for other things. And eventually I found my way back to religion. And from religion, I kind of found myself back to kind of conservatism, but I always knew that it was sort of a futile endeavor without something else, the way that people like Ben Shapiro described it. And that's sort of how I became right wing, when I started asking myself questions about, okay, so how do these principles ever get realized in a way where they can actually start fixing problems? I guess my experiences with religious communities demonstrated to me just that the religious way of organizing people's lives is just more functional. That's not a reason to believe in religion necessarily, but it demonstrates sort of the lie that the best way to do things is just sort of this sexual and family free-for-all with sort of inside a corporate structure, no less, as existed in sort of the Silicon Valley Bay Area way, or the Seattle way of doing things. And it was sort of structuring this. It was grappling with these questions of how do we have a political order that actually leads to fruitful human life, that led me to right-wing questions and right-wing answers. And people know the authors that I've read and reference all the time in this regard, right? I'm kind of sick of mentioning them so much, but that's where you encounter people like Spandrel and de Maistre, and James Burnham and people like that, right?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's very interesting because you obviously come from a class which is basically born to become left-wing. So I also come a bit from this background. I think you are what Marxists would call a class trader, to this. And for those people, because obviously some people are just driven to the right wing because they are losers of globalism, and they're being replaced by workers, and then they have to become nativists. They're being tribalized by force. I don't want to belittle this, obviously. And I think it's what you said, and that reoccurs very often when I ask people, like from your background, why they became right-wing. It's what Solzhenitsyn said: live not by lies, to being appalled by hypocrisy and being unable to live by these lies, seeing the stark contrast between this ideology and the reality, and then just go on with it because it's just nicer if you follow the streams or the mainstream. I think that's what I got from what you said, that you are just not able to live with this hypocrisy.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a very hollow belief, and there's always this accusation that modern Christians can't believe in the ways that our ancestors believed hundreds of years ago, when there wasn't this modernity around, where we doubt everything around us, including what's right in front of our faces these days. But when I look at Christians, what I see is like a very sincere attempt to grapple with spiritual reality that I just don't see in modern progressivism. In modern progressivism, I just see posturing in an attempt to kind of look pious while simultaneously helping yourself to political power. And I just don't respect that. And I think, I don't think I'm the only one who has this problem.
No, I agree. I think there are a lot of people who are struggling with this, with the life within this ideology, and I think that's also not only the meme, not only the satire, not only the humor and the style, where I think our ancestors, conservatives, and people who are ultimately also believing in something superior to just life and hedonism are superior. Because if you really it's the meme of these cat ladies, and of this, I think it's the most unhappy demographic, this childless woman over 40. These people are just not happy, they're just very miserable.
I feel for them, really, I do.
Me too. It's brutal, and I think more and more people are just alienated and fed up with this artificial life in ugly suburb, and like everything around us gets more ugly and more boring. The people, the buildings, and the only thing that gets nicer and brighter and more colorful are screens and the CGI effects. So, and I think a lot of people don't like this world, and aesthetically, and I think the aesthetic revolt and the moral revolt against this boring and nihilistic world, that's where we really shine and where we really have our biggest assets, so to say.
Yeah, there needs to be a spiritual revivification, and there are some seeds, but we just need to get them in a better place, because what churches are experiencing are in America at least, are a huge generational divide. And the generational divide is between conservatives who kind of want to be they want to be conservatives and they want to follow their faith, but they're also kind of going with the flow and they're not even aware of it. And then there are people who they want to make a more radical break, who are usually younger, and realize that a more radical break is needed. And these two perspectives need to be synthesized. And I'm always very cautious about starting knife fights within religious communities, because the left does this because they know that if the religious community becomes politicized and they turn on each other and the whole thing explodes, they kind of win. But we only succeed if a church community stays together. We only succeed if some tradition maintains itself, and where the fathers teach the sons, and where the sons teach their sons after them. And that's not something that we can accomplish through a political knife fight. We need to somehow educate the boomers. We somehow need to educate Generation X and kind of get through this at a deeper level. And that's sort of my feeling with religion. That's the obstacle we need to overcome. I don't know if there's a way around a return to religion, because no people that have cared about the future have ever been irreligious, into my understanding of history.
Now, I agree with you that these knife fights, and these divisions are problematic, even toxic, so to say. But also when you come to religion or even ideology, they're in a way unavoidable, because if people really believe into something, then the details become very important. Because if it's just a pragmatic approach, then also it's not a real religion or a real ideology, so to say. But agreeing with you, I think not everything should be politicized. Not everything can be politicized. I also think that the idea of, in a way, uniting religion and politics and creating political religions, I don't think it really worked in the 20th century. So I'm kind of wary of that, and I think it's also a bit problematic if you then utilize religious resources for political aims, because it might also be that you then destroy them and in a way profane them and desacralize them. So I think that's why you have to be very very wary. And I'm more like, the separation between Caesar and God, the emperor and God, that you should keep political things within politics,
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that religion needs to be apolitical, but religion in its core has to be beyond politics, but there will always be a dimension of religion that's dragged into politics. And dealing with that contradiction and reality is always a very difficult thing for Christians to parse. And we're going to have to parse it at some stage, but maybe that's beyond the scope of this live stream. So I'm not so sure I have any super chats. I'm going to ask people for questions. We're at the hour. You wanted to talk about, or topics you wanted to cover while we're here?
Sorry, it just phased out. You last time.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So we're at the hour now. I'm asking for questions. I haven't gotten any super chats yet through Entropy, but is there any topics you wanted to cover? With regards to sort of prospects going forward? I guess to maybe prompt you a little bit, I'm still very cautious about in real life activism. I like conferences, I like book groups, I like organizations, but I don't like anything public. To me, it's very dangerous, and it has this weird tendency to empower our enemies. And do you feel that there's another side to that, though, that I'm missing? I guess I should ask.
Yeah, I think that's the first thing where we disagree.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's very important. I think real life activism and like real life organization is very important, because you will always have it, because there's always a part, even if the demographic situation is not so nice, there will be some young men who want to get organized, want to do something, go on the streets. And this has to be done in a strategic and sensible manner. And if it's done like that, and that's what we do with our movement Generation Identity, I think it can have a net positive effect. Obviously, you have to be very wary. It has to be 100% legal. in any way, but it also has to be as approachable that you gather enough solidarity to be able to face repression. But if this works, then there's nothing more powerful than a visible act of disobedience. It destroys the authority of the ruling ideology much more, than other little acts. I think all kind of activism, all kind of acts of disobedience against the ruling ideology are important, but visible acts like demonstrations, like also banner drops or creative actions are very powerful. And I think they inspire people. They also recruit new people. They can give people hope. And also, if they're done the right way, they can force the enemies to overreact. Obviously, if they're done wrong, then they are just perfect to justify repression, and they can help the enemy a lot. So I think it's very complicated. You can do a lot of damage if it's done wrong, but if it's done right, it can be a perfect like a perfect helper for the theoretical and the political parties in the right wing.
Well, I'll need some North American example to demonstrate activism done right. I'm kind of coming up a little dry in my memory of a successful in real life activism, but I think maybe the situation might be just different in Europe. You can't understate just the difference that there is on the continent of Europe and in America. In many ways, it's a lot bigger than the difference between America and England. But it just, I do know there's like a very different attitude in Britain to these things, or sorry, not on the European continent to these things. So, I'm kind of, I'm intrigued, but
I have two examples.
I'm going to need to see an example of a North American example.
Yeah. I think, for example, the hunt for the "You Will Not Divide Us" flags, from Shia LaBeouf was a very funny and very good example of real life activism, because he put them up as real life symbols, of his ideology. He changed. I'm very happy that maybe these actions even pushed him over the edge, and then activists united all the force, the autism power, and removed these visible signs of the other ideology. It was a sign of force, and it created, obviously it didn't meme Trump into office, but I think it was also part of this positive attitude. And for example, in the UK, there was this Black Lives Matter craze, and there was one guy who flew over a football stadium during a match with his airplane, a Cessna, I think it was, and with a banner that said "White Lives Matter." And he dominated the sky, and he forced all the 1,000 people who were kneeling down there to look up. And, like no censorship could force him to look down. And he ruled this one little moment. Obviously, these are just small examples, but if you keep doing this, we did a fun action in Vienna 2 weeks ago. There was also a left-wing demonstration, and our activists went on a construction site, and also at a banner with a slogan. It was shown during the demonstration. The whole thing was crashed. They just ran there and screamed their lungs out, and we got a lot of publicity. I think it's a good way to crash the ceremonies of our opponents, and to show them visibly that people don't believe in the ideology and authority anymore. But it has to be clever, it has to be peaceful, obviously, and the provocation has to be balanced with approachability.
Yeah, this is the trouble, though. I would agree with you about the Shia LaBeouf thing, but I consider that to be more of an basically a art demonstration, an art project that happened to take place in real life rather than a political protest. Confronting left-wing protesters it's difficult, right? Because first of all, you can't control whether it gets violent or not. And if it takes place in an urban area, the police are not going to be on your side at all. And it doesn't matter. You have to really control your optics. So in order for you to even get away with it unscathed. And so I'm very skeptical of that. The other thing I'll do is like White Lives Matter. I think this is the difference between Europe and America. In America, all sort of borrowing the formulations of the left and then replacing them, like race flipping them. that's not well received even among right-wing circles. It feels like we're still in the left's framework. And the left makes fun of it and laughs at it, and the right kind of doesn't like it very much. So I've seen a lot of people use that in Europe, but in America, I think that's not very popular because it feels like you're trying to, for instance, like normie Republicans do that kind of stuff, right? That's the kind of stuff that your boomer Republican uncle says, right? So it doesn't feel very like fresh to invert things like that. It feels more fresh to kind of come up with your own formulation that's not taken from the left at all, and to do something completely new and different that nonetheless offends them. Which is why in America the most viral slogans have all been kind of weird logical inversions, like it's okay to be white, or Islam is right about women, or stuff like that. Things that are it's obvious, it's original, it's very difficult to express in leftist language why they're bad, but they still have to object to them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I didn't know that White Lives Matter was debated so much in the American sphere, but I get your point that it's a bit defensive and repetitive, to just inverse the left-wing slogan.
It's not debated, really. It's just the all lives matter / white lives matter thing is something that, like, my parents' generation says when the white light, it's like the Black Lives Matter will be like burning down the city, and they'll be like, well, White Lives Matter too will be like what your father says or your uncle, right? It's like this thing, like, well, okay, fine.
Yeah.
That movement does not exist and can't exist. And Republicans.
What about all lives matter?
All lives matter. Like, people say that and they get booed off of stages at leftist events, right? And everyone knows that the left hates this, and the whole all lives matter, white lives matter thing. It's very much associated in America with the knee-jerk reaction that the boomers have to these events that they can't stop, right? Imagine if the situation had been reversed, right? That's so I mean, I'm this again, American culture and North American culture and European culture is very different, but American culture really needs to stay, we consciously try to stay away from just flipping around leftist slogans with the race swapped or something like that, because that's been so played out by the conservative movement that it has just not been very effective.
I agree. It's defensive. It maybe slows down the left drift of the overtone window, but it doesn't reverse it. It's reactionary at its worst.
Reactionary in the sense that it's copying them. I think sort of being I'm against being anti-whites. The anti-white stuff that has actually become a trope that's been effective in America, I would argue. Not because just being, I always say I'm anti-white. It's not because that in itself is effective, but it's because that the elites are just so explicitly anti-white that you can point to it and say, well, that's them being anti-white, right? And I'm against that, and that's an effective organizing principle because they just explicitly say it in many cases.
True. No, you just have to point it out. That's true. Yeah, but I think activism, real life activism is important. And if you look at political changes from the French Revolution to all color revolutions, I don't know, whether left or right wing, it was always also part of a political struggle that had a visible side on the streets with actions, activism, marches, demonstrations. So I think without this, it won't work, because you also have to oppose the ruling ideology in a visible way, and you need to organize, I think, vigor and protest on the streets, especially if you want to win electoral victories. You also have to create this idea of power, because I think the masses are female, as we know from elite theory, and they're very attracted to power. And these powerful images of the Trump car rallies and the rallies and the boats, this is also something that gives people confidence, and then gives everybody who's part of this movement more confidence to talk openly about it, and creates a cascade of effects and of of dynamics. And I think that's where you need visible signs, and you cannot have metapolitical change and a cultural revolution just with over the internet. So that's why I'm still a big fan of real life activism.
Although I think we have to kind of get off the internet. That's absolutely the case. But I think that the power has to be real before it becomes public. There has to be some reality there, because I've seen this kind of get smacked down so many different times, right? It's a little bit thorny, but I think we've beaten that one to death. So maybe some questions from the chat, if you still have time, Martin.
Yeah, definitely, no issue.
Okay.
Not too late.
Or unless if you have anything you want to discuss, you can bring it up too. People are asking about your what do you think about the necessity of religion, and is that going to play a role in sort of the European movement? And also, they're also asking, do you have any opinions about sort of religious division on the right that's occurred? I think they're referring to sort of the Christian pagan or the Christian Nietzschean divide that's occurred several times in this space and in other spaces.
Yeah, that's also happening again. Like in the past 5-6 years, there was kind of a peace. At the moment, there are a lot of debates again. I think in the end, ultimately, I'm an Heideggerian, and Heidegger in his last interview said only a God can save us. And I think that's the biggest problem we have with modern nihilism, is something that we cannot change with politics. But I think there's a lot of things we can do with politics, and we can create better surroundings with politics. And we have the duty to do everything that's possible to do by creating schools, communities, and also trying to get as much political power to create circumstances under which like also religious, cultural revivals can happen. So that's my approach to it. But I think in the end, ultimately, it is a religious and spiritual question when it comes to modernity and nihilism and the whole source of modern ideologies. And the second thing, I think it's necessary for all fractions of right-wing thinkers, and I think I briefly gave a little sketch of what I understand from that. People who follow conservative evolutionary thinking and who are against or criticizing modernity, progressivism, egalitarianism, this whole ontology of enlightenment. And I think those people need to stick and work together, because we are so few in numbers. It's impossible to create an hegemony on the right with a certain fraction of the right, and if you create a right-wing brother war to create a right-wing hegemony of a certain fraction of the right before we even start getting politically active, the classic purity spiral, then we'll have no chance at all. So we have to agree on drive them out, and obviously there'll be a lot of debates afterwards still, and I think it's also good that they are on the right, but we have to unite the right, to say. I think it's also, I heard this from somewhere again. So yeah.
Well, that slogan has seen better days. Someone's asking, what do you think of Shia LaBeouf coming to God? I don't know if you have any opinions on that.
Yeah, I was very surprised by that, but I'm very happy about it. And as I said before, I think that "you will not divide us" actions, that was the reason that pushed him over the edge. And I think maybe that was the reason why he had this change of mind. No, very happy about it, and I think it can.
So I'm always very skeptical of celebrity conversions, but I'm very happy that he found God, I guess. Hopefully he still is practicing. So I guess I'm encouraged by that. I feel like I kind of cut you off. Was there anything more you wanted to discuss? Because we're running a little bit short on questions from the chat right now.
No issue. Like for me, the most important thing is that we once get this conversation started, and I think it was also interesting to compare the American alt-right and the European new right. And I think what's ultimately my point, also when we talked before on the phone, is that there should be more conversation, and we should try to escape this, I would say, continental and Anglospherian echo chambers that exist. because I think there are a lot of things they can learn from each other, and there are a lot of discourses that are going on in parallel worlds. And I think we should create more more intersections where we can exchange our ideas.
I definitely want to see the European right and the American right kind of. I think the movements have to be politically separate, but there needs to be a unity of vision and a unity of hope. Their common vision for humanity and their hope for humanity has to be the exact same, and their spiritual basis has to be exactly the same. Even though I think it's ridiculous, I just think that our countries are geographically and demographically so different that they have to be administered in radically different ways. I think that there's just America has to be more divided and more. There has to be more multicultural space just out of necessity. And there's a someone's saying they sent a super chat over Entropy, and I'm trying to. Oh, here it is. Okay, someone did send a super chat over Entropy. Okay, here's a super chat. Bjork for $5 USA. The advent of AI and the intelligence explosion we will probably witness over the next 20 years, as well as synthetic biology, might counter the loss in material standards we otherwise would have seen. Yeah, I guess maybe. I'm still not convinced that there's a technological explosion outside of just natural language processing, or that this will counteract the decline in sort of system health that I think will overpower the new technology that we have. I've only seen one piece of new technology come out, and that's natural language processing for these sort of chatbots, and then sort of controlled diffusion. And that's not going to really make a serious impact on the economy, so to speak. Martin, what do you think?
I tend to agree with you. And I also think that before we have the breakthrough of the singularity and we'll start colonizing space with, Newman probes, I think there will be an age of deglobalization and neo-imperialism where global supply change and the global productivity goes down. And I think also with the problem of the baby boomer retirement apocalypse that's happening now worldwide, we will see the velocity of capital and the cheap money will go away, which will also have an effect on innovation. Obviously, this is just all, I don't have magical crystal to see the future, but I personally think that the days of constant progress, iPhone 11, 12, 14, 15, everything's getting better, everything's getting newer. I think they might come to an end. So I think eventually this breakthrough might come, but I don't think that we'll go in this direction of just being developing the technosphere in a global peace situation. That's my estimation for the near future.
Yeah, that's my sense too. I think these recent innovations in natural language processing might be deceptive in this front, although who knows what's going to come. And I also think that this stuff is this sort of the technology that we're talking about right now with like bioengineering and AI. It's so dangerous, not only to humanity, but to itself. Like it's so self-destructive that at some point there's going to need to be a conversation on how to limit its application. We can't just keep on distributing this stuff like it's just open to everyone. This is going to have to be controlled like nuclear power. And, this is going to have to require a new government with new priorities that are actually based on continuing not just human life, but intelligent life on Earth, because this stuff just has the ability to get out of control and obliterate itself and take everyone down with it. So this needs to be a new conversation for the future of humanity. And of course, no one's going to have this conversation with the current government or the current crop of elites because they can't have it.
True. Maybe there will be like a non-proliferation treaty, like with atomic bombs once a quantum supercomputer and AI has been developed. But
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I think that there's some kind of tragedy here because you cannot escape. Because if you nationally control technology and have a kind of neo-Luddite vision of slowing it down, then technological development will escape your country and flee to other countries which will then in the end become more powerful in your country and force this new technological state upon your country. So I think that's like we're doomed in a way to progress.
I'm not so sure about that, because you're assuming like there's like no world order that can kind of enforce this. And I think that these things are not just like anyone who gets the blueprints could just make them, right? Like these require a huge, apparatus of support. And so it's not like you just wake up the next day and somebody who's using a piece of illegal technology just took over the world, right? Because they have
no,
right?
Definitely not like that.
Yeah. So I mean, like this stuff is way more controllable than people think. I'm not saying that like technology development has to stop, but this is just. I mean, think of atomic energy. Like we eliminate. It's not like everyone's just building breeder reactors in their backyard, right? Like Florida doesn't have a breeder reactor to wipe out like Georgia or New York, right? Like they can't, right? And so like these things, technology doesn't work. I think oftentimes like we have this sort of our faith in technology is kind of rubbed off on us so much that we see its inevitability is sort of overpowering, and I'm not convinced that it is.
Mm-hmm. Now, I agree with you, but that nobody else, not everyone will have like the quantum computer in the basement. But if you look at the global control of nuclear warheads, the only way to control it is by having them yourself and by using this power that you have to prevent others from having it. And those people who have atomic capacities are developing them every day with also AI military technology to stay on the edge and have an edge against their opponents. So I think the only way to control AI is that the force who controls AI globally becomes the head of everybody else and pushes the AI development to its limits. So if you want to control technology, you have to be the master of technology and the master like in front, because if you don't do this, then you don't have the technological power to control the world, not to freely develop technology. So that's why I see this kind of a tragedy of progress that you cannot escape.
Yeah, maybe. I would contest that a little bit. I think that there are certain kind of like world-ending bombs that we could have produced that we just never did. Mm-hmm. Because there was like this it wasn't like, oh well, we need a bomb that would blow up the entire earth, because if we don't, Russia's going to blow up the entire earth. Like, it doesn't give you any power to make that thing, right?
No, you're right. I mean,
so I mean, I get your point. I think there's just I would quibble with it a little bit on the edges, right? I think that technology can be directed, and that is, and it needs to be directed so that humanity can thrive.
I think it should be directed, and I also think that technology is not something neutral that is like from the atomic bomb to a Stone Age axe, has no quality. And I think that there's also something negative and maybe even evil about total technological development and ever increase of our technological capacities, because human beings are imperfect. And if you give imperfect people more and more power, I think this act in itself is just as problematic as giving a little child a knife, or like a gun.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm totally for control, but I'm a bit pessimistic about the possibilities of control, because especially in geopolitics, I think it's, if you want to have a different vision of technology, you also have to become so strong and powerful that you can basically defend your empire and your greater sphere with this different vision. But I completely agree with you that it should be controlled, and it is at some point even bringing a net negative to people, in my opinion.
Yeah. Someone's asking if you have any recommendations for German language resources or German language blogs that have right-wing content.
I've just posted you in the live chat.
Okay, sure. Yeah, be great.
There's Secession im Netz, which is the blog also where I write, and the magazine that I write for, which is, I would say, the biggest and most important new right and conservative blog in Germany. which is, I think, a good place to start. And most of the important writing commentators are publishing there. And then there are a few others, like there's the Jung Europa Verlag, which is a new publishing house, which is also new right and trying to republish a lot of the conservative revolution books and texts and sources. There's Die Kehre, which is has a writing ecological approach to many things. I'll just post a few links in the chat. So I think that's the easiest thing to do.
The follow-up from the super chatter, he asked, do you think the right can succeed without a decline in material standards?
Go
ahead.
That's a very good question. To be honest, I don't think so. I think that's a bit of truth that at some point we have to face. If there's an endless supply and really this brave new world vision, then our vision, which is always has to do with discipline, with finitude, scarcity, will not be able to have political power, in my opinion. But I don't think that this will work. I don't think eternal growth is possible. I think there are spiritual resources, as I said before in a conversation, that have been drained out for a revolutionary humanistic mindset. In the end, you always have the ultimate frontier, which is death, that reminds us about our finite lives, about always forces us to think about why we're here on Earth and what's the meaning of all of it. And I think that's also the reason why transhumanists try to destroy death, because death is the ultimate right-winger in a way, because it always reminds us for the question of meaning that only we have an answer for. I think to answer the question, for real big political change, yes, I think there has to be some kind of crisis, but I don't think that there will be lacking a crisis in the future.
I would say in order for there to be a victory, there has to be a crisis that the right wing has the answer for and the left wing or the establishment does not. But I do not see that like infinite growth precluding that crisis. I think it could be a spiritual crisis. I think it could be a human replacement crisis. Just the people who are making cloning notwithstanding, obviously, who's actually making the people. It could be a crisis of meaning. So I think that there has to be a crisis that we have the answer for that the left and the establishment does not. But I do not think that has to necessarily be an economic crisis.
I agree with you.
Historically, that would be the most common way.
No, I completely agree with you. And that's also what I said about the spiritual resources. But obviously, like when we come now to right-wing populism, which is an oppositional force, and every big change, or the French Revolution, the American Revolution, it always went hand in hand with an economic crisis, because if you have bread and circuses for the people, then most of the people accept any kind of government, any kind of dictatorship, as long as the bellies are full and the TVs are playing,
Yeah.
That's my pessimism.
Well, I think we are out of super chats here. Let's do you have anything else you want to finish with before we finish the live stream?
No, actually, I think we talked about most of the points that were important for me. I think just want to invite also the English-speaking people to look a bit into the European New Right founding text, some publishing houses will start to publish it. And I just hope we can keep this conversation going. There are a lot of like more specific issues, especially about Molbach, about the elite theory, the question of metapolitics, the meaning of activism, that I think we could talk a bit longer about.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I do hope that we see more cooperation between the European and North American right, culturally at least. And I really enjoyed this conversation, Martin, and I think both you and your wife are great people, and I hope to have this conversation again, and we can continue this fruitful analysis.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, and I'm very honored that I was here, and I really enjoy your work. I think you're very interesting and challenging thinker, and so I think your following and your success on YouTube is well deserved. So I just hope you keep up your good work.
Well, you're making me blush. Thank you very much, Mr. Sellner. And with that, I guess I'll wish you a good morning, I think it is in Europe.
No, it's 11 p.m., so it's almost midnight.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got the time zones reversed. I apologize. I was thinking like Australia. Yeah, well, have a good evening then, Mr. Sellner, Martin, and I'll hope to talk to you sometime in the future.
Hope so too.
Cheers.
Bye.